5 seconds. I have a feeling that another stage in our journey has been reached and a duty done, well done, if I may say so. At the same time, I feel even more strongly that a still more difficult duty is ahead of us. Another journey has immediately to be undertaken in which there are no resting places. As far as the present plan is concerned, it may be said to have had its beginning long before the Planning Commission came into existence. Much thought and many discussions had been devoted to the question of planning in India before the Planning Commission was actually created. I suppose I can speak about the Planning Commission without being unduly modest because my connection with it has been intimate. Nevertheless, the burden of fell lightly upon me. Others carried the burden, and if I praise the work of the Commission, I do not praise myself. As I said, I can speak a little more freely about it than if I had been one of the recipients of my own praise. The Planning Commission has worked very hard, very consciously, very earnestly, and with a true crusading spirit in preparing this plan. I should like, therefore, to pay tributes to them, and it is not empty tribute paid blindly, but tribute paid with due knowledge of what they have done, and that, if I may say so, need not necessarily mean that we agree or disagree with any particular chapter or particular part of the report. The work of the Commission is, in a sense, the first of its kind, certainly the first of its kind in India. I think we might justifiably add that in its particular context, it is the first thing of its kind anywhere. Planning became well known when the first 5 year plan of the Soviet Union came into the field 20 years ago and has been something rather fashionable and much talked about ever since. It is easy to talk about planning and limited spheres of activity. Naturally, planning for a whole nation involves infinitely great effort than planning in bits. Planning in the larger sense is thus an integrated way of looking at a nation's manifold activities. I do not mean to go in for comparisons, but the old Soviet approach to planning was different from ours, both from the point of view of objectives and that of the methods adopted, though the difference between the two countries was greater in the latter case in view of the fact that we function under a democratic regime which we have deliberately adopted and enshrined in our constitution and in this parliament. Any planning that we do must naturally be within that setup. The commission does not have the right to draw up a program that has no relation to our constitution or to the setup under which we work. Now, that puts certain self imposed limitations on a plan, but I would like to say that those limitations are not final. I do not think it would be right to say that democratic functioning necessarily means limitations. It may make the way a little more difficult. The procedure adopted may have to be a little more complicated, but it should be possible for a democratic setup if it is properly worked to make provision for everything we want done. I suppose that is the only real justification for a democratic setup apart from other justifications. In a democracy, things are built on a firm foundation, even though It may take a longer time and built with due consideration for the individual. However, that is not a point I wish to labor. What I want to say is that since we have accepted a democratic setup and the way in which our parliament functions, we must consider the plan on a similar basis. We have framed a constitution and we should abide by that constitution. Nevertheless, let it not be said that every part, every chapter, and every word of that constitution is so sacrosanct that it cannot be changed even if the needs of the country or the nation so demand. If it is thought that some part of the constitution comes in the way of the nation's progress, it can undoubtedly be changed, not lightly but after full deliberations. But generally speaking, we have to plan in accordance with the constitution. Now, this plan, or rather its parent, the draft outline, was placed before the country and before this parliament a little over a year ago. At the time, it received general approval from parliament and has since then been the subject of both approval and criticism, and in some parts of the country of condemnation. Anyhow, the reaction to the plan all over the country has been very generally favorable. The planning commission has had benefit of the criticism that was placed before them, and I must say has profited even by the condemnation of certain parts of the plan. I doubt if any other plan has ever been worked out in such close collaboration with various organizations, parties, stages, opinions, and viewpoints. In fact, with all the elements that go to make up a nation's life. In that sense, therefore, it might be said to be the result of a whole nation's efforts and not only the production of 5 or 6 people in the planning commission. It represents much more than just the opinions of the members of the planning commission. They had to deal with a very difficult problem. Of course, the country is big, but apart from its size, they had to deal with a complicated federal structure and with an economy which in many ways is very backward. They had to suffer the consequences of past acts committed by us and by others. They had to handle a kind of social consciousness which, though very desirable, is nevertheless new to the country. They had to keep in view the great ambition to progress rapidly, which we all share, and at the same time to work with very limited resources to further that great ambition. They had and have to deal with a very stormy period of history, a period of trial and crisis and change, and to work with a sense of disaster round the corner in India. Often enough, we have to deal with a way of thinking which follows old ruts, sometimes with superstitions and with outlooks that stand in the way of progress. We have even had to deal with the reformer of yesterday, who is, if I may say so, with all respect, a conservative today, and with the revolutionary of yesterday, who forgets that today is different from yesterday. So, the Planning Commission had to deal with a situation that was live and dynamic, and for which no religious, economic, or other dogma was adequate. We are dealing with India and not any other country. We should not try to reproduce conditions which obtain elsewhere. Of course, there are certain principles, certain ideals, and objectives which hold not only for various countries but for various ages too. They do not change.